Now it's time to dive into the first session then, if we will, which is why we would like to hand over the mic here to MariAnne Karlsson in Sweden, professor and head of the division Design and Human Factors in the Department of Industrial and Material Sciences at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden. MariAnne, good to have you here, and the stage will be yours right now.
Thank you very much. And I'm also acting on behalf of MeBeSafe's. I think that's an important part. A guide to the integrated framework is the title. And if we move forward then, so the question is, of course, why did we need at all an integrated framework? And is it of any use to those who did not take part in MeBeSafe project? And given that there are a number of different types of solutions that are possible and have been tried over the years, rules and regulations, technology devices, increasing knowledge, etc. Given that we, as the next slides indicate, you moved on a little bit too quickly there, we have, well, you can move forward again. We decided in this project, as you've already been told, to work with nudging and coaching. And as we were different researchers, different engineers, different people working on these matters, and perhaps with different understandings of them, one of the important parts of the first steps in the project was actually to create a basis, a common theoretical basis, but also a common set of a common glossary for what we meant by these terms and what they actually held, the characteristics of these different types of measures to have an impact on drivers, cyclists, etc., their driving behavior. So moving on then, what we started off with was to actually try to, in the first step, to characterize these different approaches, a nudging approach and a coaching approach. And we tried to find out some kind of key elements that differentiated them, but by which they could both be described. So if we just take one of these aspects, picking one of duration of influences, which is the fourth aspect here of these, there is a difference in nudging is fundamentally something momentary, influencing behavior in a very specific situation, as was understood by the previous presentations, whereas coaching is in most cases based on repeated sessions, short or long, over a longer period of time, and it isn't either, it's not a specific event that is in focus. So given that we have this description, we moved on to actually trying to, as this described in the next slide, to turn these into a common description based on three fundamentally elements. And the elements are the underlying system of thinking, the type of intervention strategy, and what we called the window of opportunity. So what do we mean by these then? Well, moving on, we worked with, as I said, the first dimension was the underlying system of thinking. And here we chose to base our framework on the idea of these two, but not necessarily separate, but different thinking processes. The fast automatic process, the system one thinking, and the slow and analytical process, or system two thinking, based on the thoughts of Kahneman and discussed as well. And the question was then, what could be achieved by working with system one or system two approaches? The next slide tried to explain what we mean by intervention strategy. And here it's actually, in a way, saying we can address and focus on the person and trying to influence directly his or her way of thinking, or we can work with the driving context in a way to achieve safe driving and a safe behavior. This will be explained a little bit later, so we will follow up on this. And the third aspect, the third dimension, which is explained next, is window of opportunity. The window of opportunity emerged as quite an important aspect because it had to do with the fundamental characteristics of nudging and coaching in terms of frequency. So how frequent will the user, the road user, be exposed to the intervention, the duration of the intervention, or how long will it go on, so to speak, and the location. That is it something that is linked to a specific place, to a specific space, or is the intervention not linked to a specific location? Now, this may still turn out to be a very theoretical way of dividing it, but if we move to the next slide, we can perhaps explain the way we thought about explaining what nudging could be. Well, nudging is definitely linked to a specific situation. That's true. The window of opportunity is short. It's not prior to the event, and it's probably not after the event, but it's at the spot where it's happening. However, we can talk about both System 1 and System 2 nudges as proposed in more recent literature, even though type of nudges differ in character, where System 1 nudges are what can be called as a mindlessly influencing behavior, while System 2 nudges are intended to increase the capacity of the user to exercise their agency as described in the framework. But both they can address both safe driving context or safe driver, but as you see there, the main borderline is actually that is linked to a specific situation. So coaching then, if we move on to the next slide. Well, here the red box indicates the key elements perhaps of coaching, which is something that can happen before an event, during an event, and after an event. It's something that can go on repeatedly. And it uses perhaps primarily System 2 thinking, but in the specific situation, there are also elements where the coaching can address System 1 thinking. It's not necessarily, as I said, linked to a specific situation. It can be, for instance, taking and considering the way you're going to drive on your next trip to Oslo. Now, this was trying to describe how the coaching and the nudging are actually not contradicting each other, and they are overlapping to some degree, but they have some elements that makes them different. And that was, of course, something that we wanted to investigate further in the project. But we also wanted this framework to support, not only to describe what we were doing, but also to propose and perhaps propose the way we could address different projects or different problems with different approaches. And that is what we have described on the next slide, or started to describe. It's maybe a complex picture, but what we wanted to achieve here was that, when we face these nudging and coaching, so what should we really choose? What intervention should we choose? Should we go for nudging or coaching? Should we go for context or user? Or what were the key elements by which we could? So fundamentally, you see here, the framework has therefore been added with a kind of decision structure, where we move in and say, what is the safety problem that we're addressing, as in any design process? And the idea was then to look into, is it an unintentional error by the user, or is it, for instance, an intentional violation? Those may result in actually asking different sub-questions. So by asking questions on each level in relation to whether safe driving context should be the way out, or the safe road user should be out, or whether with system 1 or system 2, we end up with answers to whether, you know, the driving context will support users to adopt a safe driving behavior, or whether road users are or are not able and willing to adopt a safe driving behavior. Because depending on that outcome, and if we move to the next slide, there will actually be different strategies that we, based on the theoretical basis that we have, thorough reading up on matters and discussing this with the team that worked with these matters, is different strategies, different interventions, excuse me, that would potentially result in an increase in driver, a better, so safer driver behavior. If we move on to the next slide, we can see that we tried here to represent the different types of nudges and coaching activities that have taken place in MeBeSafe. You can see that the bottom, you can see what was happening in work package 4, coaching drivers to put their safe driving skills into practice. So you see here we have addressing the safe road user. It's a strategy which primarily increases motivation because these professional users have skills. And it's something that covers their driving prior to, in a specific situation, and after the event. So it has, and it's probably, even though primarily system 2 thinking being addressed, there are elements of system 1 thinking as well. If we take another example, and you turn your heads a little bit, we have the nudging drivers to adopt an appropriate trajectory. And there you see that that is addressing the safe driving context. It's to increase the opportunities but also improve the communication to the driver. And it's fundamentally an approach which addresses system 1. And I've tried to move up a little bit, speed up a little bit here because we were a little bit late. But the question is now, of course, if fundamentally, if we move on to the next slide, the big question is then if this way of thinking is something that we could work on in the future. If this way of thinking is something that has been beneficial for the project, and if actually the different type of nudging and coaching has had the desired effect. And that's something then that the remaining part of the day will hopefully answer this or straighten out this question mark. Now, if you want to move on, and it's doing lots of noises here, if you want to read more about and find out more about, evidently turn to MeBeSafe.eu, the website, where you have a 200-page report on the theoretical basis, but you also have what we call a short guide, where you can have a look and see how we hopefully, how you can work with the questions and finding out and about what strategy could be the most appropriate for a specific situation. And thank you very much.
Thank you, MariAnne, for this, as always, well-prepared slideshow on the integrated framework, which actually really is the basis or the fundament of MeBeSafe. It was the first work package, and that was absolutely necessary in order to, as you already indicated and introduced, to streamline what we're talking about in the project. What is nudging actually, how it divides up, and what is coaching actually, and where to apply it. Thank you very much.